All right, everybody, welcome back to the TrustEncode podcast. I am Chris.
And I am Randall. We're adapting to this transformative age of technology, and we know that agreeing is hard and getting along is hard. And this week we have a special guest. Frank
Yes.
Cetra is an expert in cooperatives.
Welcome, Frank.
Thank you both for the invitation, and thank you for wanting to talk about co-ops.
Yeah.
Co-ops are so important
totally.
because getting along is hard, but when we do it well, we share the benefits together.
Yeah, and I think as it intersects with this podcast, we are all about the different ways that people can come together and agree on things, how they disagree, and how they resolve those disagreements. And we've been really interested in blockchain as far as it might intersect with that. And we might get to that later on in the conversation. But before we even go there, we wanted to start just broadly with who you are, your background, and then kind of lead us into the co-op world, like how cooperatives work, and that'll set up the conversation where we can explore more like how technology intersects and all that good stuff. Tell us about yourself.
Sure thing. I'm located right in the middle of New York State, the city of Syracuse, the Onondaga Nation territory, and I've been in Syracuse for about 15 years now. And since I've been here, I started working with the Small Business Development Center at Onondaga Community College. And part of the time there, I was able to assist the general public in their small business entrepreneurial endeavors. We're a tax-funded agency that goes out and coaches and advises and helps with research and so forth. So it's really an ideal place to be able to spread the word of cooperatives and employee ownership. We're really talking about businesses in a sense when we talk about what is a cooperative. It's something that exists to fulfill a need, right? To fulfill a group of people's needs, just like the initial corporations were initially chartered, right, to fulfill a need for people. So my background, I didn't realize it at the time, but my first experience with cooperative was, having a youth credit union account when I was growing up in my father's workplace credit union.
Yeah.
Didn't really realize what that meant at the time. And I think a lot of other people might not realize it either. So I think it's kind of a good starting point to say, if you've ever been a part of a credit union, if you've ever had an account at a credit union, you've been a co-op member. A credit union is essentially a consumer cooperative, fulfill the same needs that a bank does, right? Checking and savings and lending. So you were a member, that means you were an owner. What's the one thing to keep in mind about them is it's all about ownership, right? It's all about the idea that you as an individual, along with a group of other people, can have ownership of a way to fulfill your needs. And the credit union, what that means is that you would have the ability to serve on a committee, you could have the ability to run for the board of directors, serve on the board of directors, vote for the board of director members, and have some say in the direction, right? The strategic vision, the goals and objectives, how your money is being spent, and how your money is being put to use. And I hope people consider that if you have a local credit union near you, it's a great opportunity to first dive into being a member owner of
Right.
a form of cooperative.
And so let's stick with the credit union model. Why would a credit union choose that model, and why would a customer want to be part of that? Because I do think that is interesting. Like if I'm looking at it compared to say a private business or something like that, if I'm a consumer or a participant in that credit union, so I'm depositing my funds, so that sounds like it's unlocking the ability to also participate in other ways in certain forms of the governance, electing the board, and also just like a sense that I'm contributing to my community. As a consumer, I guess there's kind of three lenses, like consumer, employee, and then also kind of who are there kind of majority owners? So I'm trying to like suss out the stakeholders of a credit union and understand kind of the role that they play in it.
Yeah, exactly. Different classes of individuals. Although in credit union, if you are a member owner, you have an account at that credit union. You may or may not be an employee, and vice versa. If you're an employee, you may or may not be a credit union member, right? I mean, obviously, we would love for you to be, but one of the principles of credit union membership is that it's voluntary and it's autonomous, and the options are there, and the requirements and the policies are there, and you can choose to join if you meet those. Why you might choose a credit union versus a for-profit bank is that the idea behind a cooperative is that the profits or the surplus that are generated from a business gets funneled back into the entity itself, right? The idea is to build and grow within, increase the value of the services that are being provided, versus a for-profit institution like a bank, in which you do have shareholders and folks who will be receiving a large portion of those profits potentially, right? A bank or a for-profit corporation is managed according to shares of stock. How many shares of stock does this person own would make a difference in the amount of revenue that they would receive at year's end, right? The value. In a cooperative now, that's limited because a credit union, I mean, you have set rates, right? Interest rates or terms that you know what those are going in. If you put more money in, right, you would receive more money out. That's your level of participation, is how much money do you have to put in, because how much you get back out would be larger than somebody who is putting less money into the credit union.
When you're talking about the difference between shareholder and customer owner, the difference there is that I, as the participant in a credit union, I have a say.
Everybody has just one vote, as opposed to a for-profit corporation in which your votes are based upon the number of shares that you have. So it sort of lays a more level playing field for folks to participate together.
So, and also it sounds like it's a little bit more weighted towards me, the individual, meaning that I have somebody who has $20 deposited, and I have somebody who has $500,000 deposited. They're each one vote, and they're voting in the service that they're participating in. Whereas a shareholder, many of them could not even be members of that bank, and so they're going to make decisions about how the company is run based on their own interests, which might be way out of alignment with mine as a customer. As a customer, I might get more fees and and they might find that valuable to them because it's providing more profit for the bank. But me as a customer, that's eroding how valuable that service is.
It's not something that is easily measured, right? Because the levels of influence are still potentially there. There are expansive social concerns outside of the credit union unit or the cooperative unit itself that heavily affects that sort of thing.
Market forces and social forces. Yeah. We touched on this multi-stakeholder thing, which is super interesting. But before we go there, maybe let's look at some examples of some co-ops that everybody has heard of.
Yeah, the one that many people may have heard of if you're into the outdoors. REI has been a consumer cooperative for quite a long time, and offering mountaineering equipment when they initially got started. That's very similar to your local grocery co-op, consumer retail co-op. You are a member, and the members get together to increase their buying power and ideally provide them with better prices. Okay, and that's how these things got started. This is how some of the original co-ops in England got started. Factory workers who were being forced to pay higher prices than they would like for the basic necessities of life from corporate-owned entities, got together and pooled their money to buy what they needed. So your local grocery co-op, REI, similar examples to that sort of consumer purchasing cooperative. A couple other examples, such as the Blue Diamond and the Florida orange growers. Tillamook is the other one on the list here. Dairy groups of farmers who join together to benefit from joint marketing, joint quality control, or joint purchasing, etc., creating a benefit for the whole that an individual might not be able to access themselves. Housing co-ops, we know that in New York City, for instance, near me here, cooperatives, condominiums are a big thing. Cooperatives can range down to a single family home that's owned by 4 or 5 people. It's large enough to fit everyone. And you make sure you got enough space for everyone, because just because you're cooperative doesn't mean everybody's going to always get along either, right? And doesn't mean everybody's going to agree. That's why there are different ways of governance and democratic decision making that become a part of it. But I've lived in a housing co-op in the past, in which we had about 11 people in a single home, and we got together on a monthly basis for regular business meetings, and we had our shared chores and other shared responsibilities. And so housing co-ops can be any size, just like any cooperative really can be any size, any industry. It's just a form, a type of entity for anything you want to do anyway.
And so sometimes they're called cooperative enterprises, but they don't have to be enterprises per se.
No. I mean, enterprise really sounds corporate. I do tend to use the term enterprise actually a lot when I talk about business specifically, as opposed to something like a housing co-op, which again kind of is operated like a business. If you want it to survive, right, you still got to pay the bills, have the income, and do the management of the property. But at the same time, it's less of an enterprise and more of, I would say, like a collective effort, right? A collective coordination among people to accomplish something.
I enjoy that word collective, but like a shared enterprise gives a feeling of mission and purpose. We're going and doing, we're not just standing around in a group.
Well, you hope that the people who are the members of the cooperative, whatever form or type it is that we've been talking about, one of the things they're going to do is hold the leadership to that mission and vision, right? Because they've probably joined because of a specific mission or vision that cooperative had, or were a part of developing it even early on, and want to be able to maintain that as a part of their development. Our credit union here in Syracuse, for instance, is very much social justice based in its outlook. It's a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, that has a mission to serve the underserved. So if we were to do something that wasn't in line with that, hopefully our members would start yelling.
And who would they yell to, Frank?
There are hierarchies, right? Oh no, not hierarchies. I thought we were talking about cooperatives here, and everybody's equal and everything's equal. But everybody is not tasked with being able to do everything at any time within an organization, because there are processes and policies, and there are limits on folks' time, individual abilities, specialties, and expertise. So a cooperative may have a member of the staff, an employee, who is tasked with member outreach or member support, and that may be a first level. Within the employee ranks, right, you would still have somebody who is doing sort of HR management level work, who would be available. And if you've got your standard levels, you've got the board of directors that would be the ultimate fiduciary responsibilities for an organization, right? Very similar to a standard corporation or a not-for-profit agency that folks might be familiar with. You've got a board, a group of individuals who set the policies and procedures and take care of the oversight and respond to the members' needs.
We have all these roles, and there might be also roles, if I understood correctly, for non-member employees. Is that right?
Certainly. Everybody who works at a cooperative does not have to be a member, does not have to be an owner. And I think, Randall, this is a little bit going into talking about the worker cooperative, which is slightly different from the consumer cooperative or the producer cooperative, in which you've got a group of individuals who are producing something as workers who are also the owners of the business. Okay, so a recent example here in New York State that one of my colleagues worked really closely with was the conversion of a family-owned lumber and hardware company, fourth generation family-owned, conversion to selling that to the workers. Okay, so the workers, the folks who run the lumberyard, the folks who run the cash people out, the folks who do the inventory, the folks who clean the bathrooms, those workers are now the owners. Okay, so they have the decision-making powers over themselves at this point. Nobody else has single control, so they have that control over themselves now, and those worker owners exist, and that number can rise or fall. But that doesn't mean that everybody who works for the organization has to be an owner, right? It can just be a standard employee, because there are considerations to when you bring somebody new in as an owner. I mean, you don't just pick somebody up off the street who filled out a job application who you're given a part-time job to and, grant them ownership status right off the bat, right? There's a period of time where you're going to see if it's a good fit, if they work out for the organization, et cetera. And usually the current worker owners would have to vote, if not unanimously, in an overwhelming way, to grant that employee the opportunity to become an owner. So that gives some flexibility, right? This gives some flexibility to a worker-owned co-op, in that you can bring somebody in just part-time, temporary, to work for the company without actually having to come in as ownership of the company.
That's an interesting dynamic. I think sometimes fear that by making an organization cooperative, that the people who come in are then going to take control and wrest it from the founders.
All right, possible, although I think unlikely that there could be a coup from below of a group of members who decided, we want to transform this financial institution into some other mission, right? And they could potentially take the path to do that. Now, that would be very challenging to do. It's not impossible, but it would be very challenging to do, especially with a larger organization with thousands of members. Now, the worker cooperative, on the other hand, right, it's harder to become an owner, and so it's even harder to think of somebody coming in and potentially upending the working vision of that organization. And usually the bylaws wouldn't allow for that to happen without some kind of overwhelming majority to be able to change significant parts of the organization. So I guess it bears mentioning that, just as with any standard not-for-profit or corporation, you've got a set of bylaws within this cooperative entity that details how voting is done, that details how the democracy takes place, that details what kind of majorities are needed to make large decisions, such as changes to the bylaws and so forth. Now, all that being said, right, Randall, yeah, there's always the possibility that somebody could arrange some kind of a challenge to the status quo and make changes, but it's not very easy to do.
Do boards of directors have any role in that process, in terms of like how much influence on the board of directors comes from worker owners or comes from member owners?
If you've got a worker owner board solely, so for instance, if you own a worker cooperative and you're one of those worker cooperative owners, and that's the only class of members, then everybody on the board would be a worker owner. And it may be everybody who's a worker owner, right? If you've got 5 worker owners of a small startup cooperative, then they're probably all going to meet together as the board. If you've got a group of 48 worker owners, such as this lumber hardware company that I mentioned earlier, 48 folks are not going to meet together to make governance decisions. You're going to have an elected board out of that 48. So if you've got a multi-stakeholder co-op, and you briefly mentioned that earlier, the idea that you have different classes of shareholders, right? You may have worker owners, you may have consumer owners, you may have investor owners who have contributed financially to the co-op, have a vote, etc. That board of directors then is likely going to be made up of some ratio from those different classes. And that would be reflective of probably who has the most day-to-day responsibility for the operations of that co-op, because those folks are going to be the ones who have a lot of the knowledge and the desire to make the right decisions in the end. But that doesn't mean that other people don't have a vote. Other classes potentially would have a vote as well.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking about all of this. I'm thinking in broader terms, in comparing it to like a corporation. It seems like corporations are geared to be very efficient, like capital allocators, which works out well for certain activities. But it sounds like co-ops are a more effective at almost like agreement allocation, if you will, like getting or stakeholder participation, which sounds to me both more sticky, as in like the possibility for longevity and deeper roots, but also stickier in the sense that it's a lot of perspectives to navigate. Question in the background there, which is about scalability, because corporations have been really effective at, I mean, are there like multinational corporations? There's tons of those. And I'm trying to think of, like, we had the REI example, which is a big one. Scalability, where do they seem to fit best in the world? Is it, do they have difficulty scaling because of all this navigating, negotiating, mapping out like who does what and who owns what and what their role is? And so it sounds like a much more complex set of
It almost sounds chaotic.
Right? Yeah, sounds
Almost sounds chaotic in it, and I'm sure it could be in practice. But I think the best example of that would be the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain. And you mentioned, how corporations may be traditionally, for-profit corporations are best at allocating capital. They're also best at, making sure that the capital ends up in the pockets of the shareholders at all expense, right? Because that's what we see when the going gets rough a lot of times. But in a cooperative, for instance, and Mondragon is an example of this, if the market, and Mondragon is a multinational cooperative corporation, produces a variety of goods and services, and so they have some flexibility and diversification. And so if the market for one product that they're producing begins to drop, and it no longer becomes feasible for them to produce a surplus, sales over expenses for that product area, they can, and what they would hopefully still choose to do, from my understanding of their history, is that they would take and retrain folks. They would, as a corporation, decide to enter into some other market need and provide that product or service, and maintain those jobs, just kind of moving them laterally from sort of one department to another department, or perhaps a new department or division, and maintain that, and probably have some flexibility with how they're able to do that, because there's more money, there's more capital within the organization to work with that, as opposed to more of that capital sitting in some majority shareholders, a capital account somewhere.
Yeah, when I said efficient, it was both a compliment and an accusation, right? Because it cuts both ways, and you pointed it out exactly, which is very efficient at allocating capital, also very efficient at, should the decision be made to do otherwise, suddenly taking that and going somewhere else and just liquidating a company or something like that. So, and all the stakeholders, it don't matter except for the shareholders, except for any like potential legal recourse they could have, but usually they don't have much. And so it's basically shareholders decide, and then poof, business changes or is sold or gets merged or something like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we are trying to promote right now is this idea of conversion of
Mm,
businesses from single owners to employee owners, particularly with the baby boomer generation, the coming of age of a lot of small business owners who are looking at retirement. And what we don't want to see is that capital to either diminish on its own, just with the company closing down, let's say, and no continued operations taking place, nor do we want to see that capital assumed by some other entity that might come in and purchase that business, right, and close down jobs and just take that capital for use in other ways. We want that capital to be maintained within that business and within the ownership of the new workers, maintain jobs, maintain legacy, maintain a functioning business for a community as well. And so it's a really different idea than take the money and run.
mm. Yeah.
When I think about working at a co-op, I I think about the grocery co-op, and I don't think that's the right intuition to have. I figure a cooperative enterprise that's running like a business, it's still going to have structure. You're still going to report to somebody. You're still going to be accountable for performance. What would be different? How would it feel differently?
You use the example of the worker-owned co-op. Um, then although you would potentially report to somebody in the hierarchy of business process, let's say that there's a general manager, let's say that there's a department manager, let's say that there's a staff person, you're still going to have some kind of flow of information between those levels. And that's just a process of getting the work done. All the other aspect, the social relations between workers and between those folks in those different levels, there's the opportunity of affecting policy, right, as the worker owner. And nobody's going to set a policy without your participation in that. If it's something such as a sick leave policy, somebody in a vertical hierarchy position is going to manage that policy implementation. If the cooperative is big enough and there is that need for multiple levels of management, somebody has to manage and oversee the fact that we are all humans, we are all faulty in some degree, we will all make errors. We need to double check each other's work, we need to manage certain processes that everybody doesn't have time to do everything. So you're going to have some say in that policy making. Now, if you're looking at an example such as a consumer co-op, like grocery, may or may not be a worker co-op as well. And in many cases is not. In many cases is just the members, the people who shop there are the owners, and the employees, although they may also be member owners in that same way, aren't necessarily worker owners if it's not structured that way. And so that creates more of a top-down management setting in the working environment, as opposed to the governance environment of the whole organization, which those individual workers can still participate in above the day-to-day management, where they may not have as much say. We want to couch this in the idea that this cooperative is based upon principles and is based upon mission and vision. And that if there's a reason to be upset because, my general manager is doing something that is not cool and it does not fall within what we believe to be the best alliance of our working principles and our mission and our vision, then that's a reason to go to the board of directors and have a discussion with them. Do we need a new policy? Do we need to change a policy? Can we explore what this means for us as workers? You just got to think that it comes back to sort of human dynamics and communication channels a lot of the time too, right? Making sure that communication channels are open and available. We have, for instance, at the credit union, the example that I've been talking about, I sit on the board there. I'm actually board chair at this moment in time, and we have an email address that comes straight to the board. So anybody in our multi-thousand person membership can send a message to that email address and it'll come straight to the board. It'll be something that the staff or the employees don't even see. So that somebody in the membership wanted to say, we have an issue with this employee, we have an issue with this management style or this management policy, they wouldn't necessarily have to talk to somebody in management about that. They could talk directly to the board of directors about that as well.
That really puts an interesting frame and adds some richness to the story of what the co-op really is there at your credit union.
The intention is that folks are able to have access to everybody else. We're all members on the same level. We all have one share. We all have one vote. We all have the same opportunities, rights, and responsibilities. Just because I'm sitting on a board of directors and you are just someone who has an account with us doesn't mean you should not have access to me.
It's interesting. The word that I keep going back to, it seems to be like stickiness, and that might have good or bad connotations, but things that you want to stay and embed and have longevity, because the work that you have to do in order to create the co-op and then to ensure that, because it goes beyond the efficiency of other working relationships or other purchasing consumer relationships. It's almost like, what are the things in our world that we think should have long staying power? And I think a bank is a great example. It's like, what matters the most, right? Is that you have a safe place for your money, and that it's going to support, if there are benefits from you storing your money in that place, to the organization itself, that it's pursuing things that are good for the community, things like that, where it has this kind of direct financial anchor, if you will. And it's almost like there are probably good places for both of any of these entities, because if I can think of what for myself, like it'd be exhausting to be it'd be like like every aspect of my life is involved in some co-op or another. It's almost like, what are the things that I really care about, and that's worth kind of building more of a cooperative relationship with, versus if I want to be more of a casual consumer. Definitely more work goes into these things.
I think that's a good thought that you have there in terms of where we're at right now with the cooperative economy, solidarity economy, the cooperative ecosystem, is that it's a good idea for folks who are just becoming aware to look at, what's important to them, where do they place their value, where do they want to place their time, and consider, not having to take on the whole world. We can't all do everything. On the idealist level,
yeah, let's
right?
go there.
If we thought, every business and every entity is cooperatively run and cooperatively owned, right? If we got to that point, it was like an Ursula Le Guin novel, in a sense, we could say that, you are not going to be participating in every one of those cooperatives, right? You're not going to have the time to participate in your grocery cooperative governance necessarily, in your financial institution governance, at a variety of what other consumer or retail cooperatives that you might own, right? Your insurance cooperative, many insurance companies are mutuals, right? Owned by their members, but do you ever participate in those? No, right. You probably don't. They're so large that all of that is just out of sight, out of mind. You may get to vote every year on a slate of directors with a large cooperative corporation, but in the end, it's more than just the entity that matters, I think, is what we want to get through with this, is that it is also about the principles and the mission and the vision, because that is what's going to guide a cooperative in the way that benefits its members first and foremost. Doesn't benefit some outside entity, some outside shareholder. We want to make sure that if we are operating a cooperative, we're fulfilling the needs of our members.
Yeah, and it seems like there are cooperatives that we're interacting with that we might not even know are cooperatives, like REI, like Tillamook, like the insurance. Things that are called mutuals are probably a co-op. It's almost then it becomes more of a decision that community by community, what do you want to encourage? And because you can see where big corporations will come into, I think Walmart was probably kind of the quintessential example of this, where they'll come into a place and just their presence there changes the community drastically. As a city or as a county or as members of those cities and counties, the more that you can prefer the cooperative model means that the more that you have a chance for having businesses and collectives of people. Collective is probably the better word, because you could have collectives of labor, collectives of like volunteer time, where it's cultivating a sense of restoring benefit to the members of that place, or of that organization. That's just kind of like an observation I had, which is like it's a key consideration to make, similar to like being democratic, just like, yeah, go democracy. You want to also think, let's be pro cooperative as well, because that tends to lend more engagement and deeper roots, more thoughtful participation. Going back to blockchain, though, that's what's interesting too, is they're both distributed methods. We're going to bridge to blockchain because that's one of the core threads of our podcast. And thinking about distributed shared ownership, it's all very interesting. They're not necessarily easy to participate in off the bat, because we're still in this very much growing phase, nor are they easy to spin up. If you look at Cardano, thousands of node operators, but they're all getting benefits. And as a stakeholder in that system, it actually is, I feel, a much bigger sense of participation. And it's a financial layer that's super important. It's just like, hey, we want, no matter the circumstances, for this network to be safe, to be maintained, going back to the things that you care about. I like your vision of like, let's have the cooperative model be the first choice in most things. It is going to be more work, more to navigate perhaps, but at the same time, the benefits that it gives are more immense. And I was just thinking about the different parallels between distributed models like blockchain co-ops. They're more distributed, more work, but more, they seem to have this lasting or stability power that is not necessarily present in other things.
Culture shift, right, is what it comes down to in the end. We've got a distributed system. You need the parts of that system to want to participate, right, to be able to participate, whatever that system is. And today, you know how it is with people. Did you vote this year? No, I didn't vote. It doesn't make a difference, right? They don't think there's a point in participating.
Yes. Yeah, the point in participating, though, is super important. Like blockchain, for me, like I'm participating because I feel like I'm actually, well, one, it's benefiting me directly. And then two, it can benefit a lot of people similar to how I'm being benefited. And then three, I can make a difference. Like my vote actually counts.
We're talking about blockchain in a very abstract way. We can talk about Bitcoin blockchain. We can talk about the Ethereum blockchain. We can talk about the third generation blockchains like Ergo and Polkadot and Cardano. And we can talk about governance, and it's maybe still a little bit abstract, but if we look on screen here, digitalizing the co-op, this bridges to this thing called a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, and that's like propeller head speak for literally digitalizing being cooperative together. And rewinding to what you were saying earlier about engagement, it's easy to be disengaged if you don't have stake, and when you're involved, when you are going to receive a slice of the profits or the surplus, there's just so much more opportunity to care about the votes and what those votes mean.
Yeah, well, I think digitalizing is something that
I don't know, that's a word.
That's what you have on your post-it note there, Ren. Is something that is coming no matter what, and can improve. I think that's one of the things maybe we want to hope for, right? Is that it will improve participation rates, improve participation access. That's what has happened over the course of this past 18 months with the pandemic. Participation in certain things has increased. If you look at it from a digital video perspective, right? The ability to attend meetings because, I didn't have childcare tonight. So I'm just, I'm here in a meeting, but, my kid's right here next to me. So, everybody's okay with that now for the most part, in most situations and in most cases. And the co-op, whatever that co-op is, has to endorse and accept and adopt, whatever digital tech is going to be a benefit to its members, right? And if blockchain is something that is going to be a part of that, then of course there's a lot of education that has to take place on many ends of this, right? You're talking about a topic that many people are probably less familiar with than they are with the idea of cooperatives as a subject matter. And so if we're going to start blending the two in certain ways, we've got quite a mountain to climb in terms of education and awareness and how these things are going to impact people's lives.
Yeah, maybe I can simplify it even more. Forget blockchain, because at the end of the day, it's just another tool. What are elements of transformation? What will help transform things so that co-ops are more readily adopted? You mentioned voting, easier ways to participate, and so are there things like that that would help transform and elevate co-ops to be a much more default choice for people as they're deciding what business to run or how to organize themselves?
Yeah, I mean, if we stay along the tack that I was taking there in terms of like the digital meeting access, right? Then we've got the broadband issue, right? The access to high speed internet, the access to hardware, so that people can adequate hardware so that people can participate in that kind of a meeting. We've got the issue of governance in our municipalities, right? And educating economic development agencies and so forth, so that they are not just going to accept something such as a cooperative, but promote it, actively promote it. Of course, top down, does get the job done a lot of times a lot quicker than bottom up organizing can, and from sort of grassroots movement development. So if we can get some champions, right, to focus their efforts. And so this is, so what would that entail? That entails, lobbying, that entails some political communications, that entails demonstrating successes, right, showing and managing successes. And that's part of what is happening within my agency that I work for, the SBDC right now, is that, I don't know if your listeners are interested, but, Senator Gillibrand from New York State was one of the champions of getting the Main Street Employee Ownership Act law passed in 2018, which basically created a mandate for us at the SBDC to provide this sort of technical assistance, outreach, education on employee ownership, not just cooperatives, but other forms such as ESOPs as well, as one example. But also provide a mandate to the SBA, our federal, business administration, to find ways to make it easier to lend to cooperatives, right? So this is a really big top level down push to make cooperatives more accessible, a bigger part of our economy in the future. Now, from the bottom up, we're taking this one project at a time. We're demonstrating successes. Again, that lumber hardware project here in New York State that I mentioned is a great success story, right? And we are sharing it in as many places with as many people as we can, and talking about that story. And one of the other things is the sense that people don't understand how to make decisions together very well. It's a lost art, I guess, in some cases, as culture becomes more individualized, and folks are moved away from that. It takes a village mentality. They've lost awareness of how that works. So there's a lot of different democratic decision-making processes out there. How can we bring that education to them as well? It's a lifelong learning process, being a part of a cooperative and being a part of a community that adopts and endorses cooperatives, because it's always a changing playing field. I mean, we are part of change every day.
Nice.
I want to wrap up with a call out to the blockchain community. In the tech world, we have been doing this grassroots thing, this bottom-up mechanism, this concept of a DAO, and it has started simple. And I don't know how much visibility that community has with this thing that we've been doing for a couple 100 years called cooperatives. And that's part of why we wanted to do this episode. All of these mechanisms that we've been talking about, how cooperatives have proven to be workable when we bring these to the digital DAO, to the digital co-op, we are going to create so much more value.
Mm. And I heard a few things there that I'll call out specifically that would help conversely the co-ops themselves. One is access to funds. So it sounds like capitalization of a co-op, since they are different in nature, a bank or any other lending institution will be like, what is this? So access to capital, also things that help encode the bylaws and distribution mechanisms of a co-op. You have different agreements or different ownership arrangements. You might have the ways that money is distributed or resources are distributed. So things like smart contracts that could help with that, voting mechanisms that help make participation easier to bring on ramp. And also I heard things that help communicate. So visualization and demonstration of good working models are key, both in just how to participate, but then also the successful models that are out there. I can see a clear tie-in with blockchain for the first three I mentioned. I'm not so sure about the education piece, but I mean, that's more what we're doing. And so, yeah, so this has been a really interesting conversation. I know a whole lot more about co-ops than I did before. I've participated loosely in them, like more as the consumer and not in the governance side of things. So it was really great to hear a new perspective and a lot more in depth about how they work.
Well, I want to call out a special thanks to our guest, Frank Cetera, today. Thank you for joining us and educating us and helping us come along to, in the technology world, where we've been in the social world for so long already.
It's been a lot of fun. I love talking co-ops. Let's do it again sometime.
That sounds great. All right. Well, this is a special episode of the TrustEncode podcast. Thank you all for joining in. Please leave your comments below about the ways that you think that blockchain and co-ops can play together nicely and make this world better as we move and transform. Thank you all for joining.
See you next time.
See you next time.